Good evening, one and all. This is Rudranarayan Das, Executive Director, Center for Adivasi Research and Development. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to Netaji Memorial International Lectures. International Series Lecture Series 2022 with the second session of this lecture series. We are proud to announce that this lecture series is conducted along with NUJS Kolkata and Ravenshaw University Cuttack. I welcome our speaker for today, Professor Rekha Pandey, and honorable guest, Professor Chakrabarti, Vice Chancellor, NUJS Kolkata, and participants across the globe through Facebook and YouTube Live. On behalf of Center for Adivasi Research and Development, I extend my profound gratitude to our patrons, Professor Dr. Sanjay Kumar Naik, respected Vice Chancellor, Ravenshaw University, and Professor Nirmal Kanti Chakravarti, respected Vice Chancellor, NUJS Kolkata. The convener of this largest virtual conference, historian Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda and Professor Srinivas MSc. The main outcome of this conference is to come up with the national and international framework for the education system in future. Sorry for the interruption. Rajashree Dalai, please mute yourself. Sorry for the interruption. The main outcome of this conference is to come up with a national and international framework for the education system in future. The crux of this conference will be the use of digital technologies such as artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and virtual reality that is being increasingly adopted after the outbreak of COVID-19. We hope we remember the contribution of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose by celebrating this virtual event. We hope this conference would help students, faculties, researchers, and all to expand their mental horizon and help the education system to adopt the best. Ladies and gentlemen, in today's evening, we have with us one of the very pioneering feminist of our country, Professor Rekha Pandey. Professor Pandey is the director of Society for Empowerment through Environmental Development, former head Center for Women Studies, University of Hyderabad, and head Department of History, University of Hyderabad, India. Professor Pandey will deliver her talk on women and colonial struggle with special emphasis on Rani Jhansi Regiments. So without taking much time, I would like to invite Professor Srinivas to moderate this session and carry forward. Over to you, Professor Srinivas.
Thank you, Rudra. Thank you very much. A very good evening to one and all. A very warm welcome to today's speaker, Professor Rekha Pandey. And perhaps this program is organized in commemoration of 125th birth anniversary of one of the legends of Indian freedom struggle, that is Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. And this program is organized by the Center for Adivasi Research and Development in association with National University of Juridical Sciences, Kolkata. And as a employee from the same university, it becomes my responsibility as well to introduce my university also, which is part of this program alongside the Center for Adivasi Research and Development. National University of Juridical Sciences, Kolkata was established in the year 1999, and we have 23 years of excellence in legal education. And National University of Juridical Sciences, Kolkata stands in number 2 position amongst all the 24 national law universities in the country. And National University of Juridical Sciences is imparting legal education at UG, PG, and PhD level. And it has been our immense pleasure under the guidance of our Vice Chancellor, Honorable Vice Chancellor, who is also present in this program, Professor Nirmal Kanti Chakrabarti, who has given approval for not only conducting this program, but as well having a collaboration undertaking with the Center for Adivasi Research and Development, Odisha, and also alongside the Ravenshaw University, Cuttack, which is having more than 100 years of glory as far as excellence in education is concerned. And as mentioned, this program is in commemoration of 125th birth anniversary of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. And we have planned on that every 23rd of every month, there will be a program in commemoration of this national leader. And there will be programs with reference to the kind of contribution national leaders have made during and around the times of Indian freedom struggle. And as such, today's topic that the honorable speaker has chosen about Rani Jhansi is very, very important. And as such, this Rani Jhansi's revolution happened even before the formal Indian legal struggle. And it's a real tribute to the leaders like Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose that we are in his commemoration, we are able to trace out to those historical movements which have actually structured, shaped, and immensely contributed towards the kind of independent country that we are in. And with these words, I would like to invite Professor Nirmal Kanti Chakrabarti, the Honorable Vice Chancellor of National University of Juridical Sciences, Kolkata, to give his inaugural address before we invite Professor Rekha Pandey. Over to you, sir. Professor Nirmal Kanti Chakrabarti, the Honorable Vice Chancellor of NUJS, Kolkata.
Professor Srinivasulu, I thought respected Vice Chancellor sir is not in the meeting. He's left, I thought.
Yeah, it seems there is some technical issue he's also having. So he has just texted. Rudra?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it seems there is some technical glitch with him. So we'll have him once he gets those things clarified. In the meantime, we'll invite Professor Rekha Pandey to
Yes. Please invite Professor Pandey.
Professor Pandey to speak to us on women and anti-colonial struggles with a special emphasis on the Rani of Jhansi Regiment. Over to you, Madam. Professor Rekha Pandey.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Can you see my screen? I'm sharing my screen.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course, ma'am.
Okay. Dear friends in Center for Adivasi Research and Development Studies and Ravenshaw University and National University of Juridical Sciences. It's indeed a pleasure to be part of this program, especially, since you are celebrating Netaji's, birthday every year. And I really feel very honored to be part of this talk. So what I thought, I would take up this whole topic of how women struggled against the colonial government, and I would emphasize on the Rani Jhansi regiment. See what happens in Google. If I make my slides big, they don't move. This is a problem I have seen a large number of times. So I'll keep my slides small and I can share my presentation later on. And all of you know that the reason we are here, that we are celebrating the birthday of Subhash Chandra Bose. In fact, every 23rd of January, it comes in January that this is celebrated. And he has always been a very defined patriot and a nationalist of our country. He fought against the Britisher during the Second World War, and he played a major role in getting rid of the colonial domination. And what is important is, Bose joined Japan. He also went to Germany, and that's the reason many people criticize him. But at the center of all this was that he was interested in getting free from the colonial shackles, and it really did not matter from where he got this help. Though Bose had studied abroad, he was educated by a number of Western teachers, and he himself was very much attracted by the socialist ideas in his own country. But then, he joined the National Congress, and under the guidance of Gandhi, he was also influenced by Gandhi. He became a very important member. He was a journalist, a youth educator, a commandant of the Bengal Congress. And during the Japanese occupation of India, especially during the World War II, he departed to Burma, and he radically protested against the colonial powers, and he was the one who founded the Azad Hind Fauj, which helped in the independence movement. Now, the problem is when we talk of independence movement, when we talk of freedom struggle, when we talk of all these struggles, by and large, we have ignored the role of women. And primarily, that is one thing. And second, all the writings have only concentrated on the Indo-Gangetic plain. We have really not moved outside this region. And if you look at it, there were so many struggles that were going on in India, different parts of the country, outside the country. And, women participated in large numbers. Right from 1817, you have women like Bhima Bai Holkar, who fought against the colonial rule. And, she defeated Colonel Malcolm in a guerrilla war. Then you also had women like Rani Channamma of Kittur, Rani Begum Hazrat Mahal of Awadh. And you have, who really started and participated in this first war of independence in 1857. Then after the, first war of Indian independence, which the Britishers called as the Great Revolt of India, you had women like Rani of Ramgarh, Rani Jindal, Kaur, Rani Tesbai, and Baizabai, Chauhan Rani, and Tapasvi. You also had a number of women like Rani Jhansi, who really participated and contributed a lot. When Gandhiji launched the Quit India movement in 1920, when he came back from South Africa, and he demanded self-rule, you had a number of women who joined him. So you had the struggle which was moving in two directions. On one hand, you had people who were following Congress and Gandhi, and you also had another stream which was developing in other parts of the country, outside the country. You had women like Sarla Devi, Muthulakshmi Reddy, Sushila Nair, Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, Sucheta Kriplani, Aruna Asaf Ali. They had all joined Gandhiji, and they were talking of a non-violent movement. Kasturba Gandhi became a very important support to this movement. You had women from the Nehru family like Kamala Nehru, Vijay Lakshmi Pandit also who joined. You had the Lado Rani Jhansi and her daughter, Manmohini Sharma also who joined. Slowly, what happened as the struggle for independence moved, we find that, slowly the scenario was changing. And this was, you cannot view the change in this scenario as a linear transformation. It was very much layered, it was fragmented at some level. And the whole role of femininity, how you look at femininity at these time, it's a very complex phenomena. And we cannot really mark it in very clear terms. And this can clearly be seen, when you look at Gandhi, what was the role which Gandhi envisaged for these women. Gandhi kept talking about the virtues of Sita. He kept talking, he bringing in a lot of mythology and saying that women should come and participate in the freedom struggle. And definitely as a result of Gandhi's appeal, you had a large number of women who came. And Gandhi emphasized that, when women come out and they participate in the freedom struggle, he was very sure that it should be a non-violent struggle. And he brought out a lot of connection between nationalism and female emancipation. He was talking in terms of not only emancipating the country at the national level, but even at the domestic level, women can emancipate themselves. They will be able to free themselves from the shackles of domesticity, male oppression. And he really spoke of freedom at the national level. When he spoke of Swaraj, he was talking in terms of reconstructing the society, bringing in reform. And definitely women were also a very important part of this. And we find that he said women could definitely contribute to this Swaraj. And to him, women were an epitome of non-violence. They were, it was in the innate nature of women to be very passive. And he felt that, any kind of non-violence movement, women would be very successful. Unfortunately, we only have one kind of narrative. This is the kind of dominant narrative which we have of the freedom struggle. And by and large, whatever literature we have on nationalism, they are also very quiet on the question of women. And by and large, nation is understood as a people who possess a historical territory, who share certain myths and historical memories. They have a single economy and certain common rights and duties, and where, all the people are legitimate members of this nation, and they follow this principle of nationalism. So by and large, nationalism is also seen as an intellectual movement which is meant to achieve an autonomy, unity, and identity on behalf of the population. So, giving this kind of a definition, you have lots of writings which have come up. But by and large, there is only an emphasis on saying the role of women, and, women will play a major role. See, women also contributed in the other kinds of struggle. They were very much a part of the army. But this is something, which we have really not highlighted till now. There are a few articles which have come up, but not much. And the main reason for this is, even today, when I'm talking of the 21st century, we have so much, bias against women, talking in terms of defense. And we find that, when we speak highly about the valor of men, the achievements of men, where, men have been at the forefront, by and large, we ignore the contribution of women, even women who are in the defense. In fact, there was so much of a bias against women that, for a long time, they were never part of the army. And however, few countries, they accepted women in combat missions. They were involved in piloting machines, or they were involved as infantry officers. In 2006, there were 8 countries: China, Eritrea, Israel, Libya, Malaysia, North Korea, Peru, and Taiwan. They conscripted women into military service. And it was only in 2013 that Norway became the first NATO country to draft women as or conscript women in the same terms as that of men. Again, in 2017, Sweden followed suit. In 2018, you had Netherlands which joined the lineup. And in 2018, only 2 countries conscripted women and men on the same formal condition, that is Norway and Sweden. So you can very well see that there is so much of a bias that we are just opening up. We are talking in terms of 2016, 2017, and 2018. As far as Indian military is concerned, we find that, all wings of Indian armed force allow women in combat roles, as junior ranks, or as combat supervisor roles, officers, and in only support roles or in special forces. And Indian Air Force has only 13.9% of women. Indian Navy has 6% of women, and 2.8% in the year 2014. And in Indian Army, if you look at the number of women, we have only 3.80% and 3% in 2018 and 2014. So, the number is really very minuscule. And the same thing can be said for, women officers are now they have started giving them a permanent commission, and they are employed in the 10 branches of Indian Army. The Ministry of Defense, it has now taken, very recently, it has taken steps to ensure that, women who were earlier inducted into the short service commission, they get a permanent commission. Earlier, women were not given permanent commission. The same is true of police also. If you look at the police, India has such a large police force, and there are a number of women. But unfortunately, with only 215,000 women, we have only 10% of women in the police force in 2020. And they make up only about 7.20 of the Indian police force. And more or less, what is very interesting is you have large number of women at the constable level. There are very few women at the top level. And though, this number is very low in a large number of states, though more than 20 states have reservation for women. And we find that for every, 5 women who are holding only 5 women are holding a very top rank of Director General in 2020. And therefore, you do not have even women in the police. In fact, along with the National Police Academy, I was a resource person with them. We published a book in, it was published in 2005. It was called Gender Issues in the Police. And what we found was, the overall attitude towards women was so ad hoc. And, what was really required that women need to be integrated into this whole system so that they also, have all their legitimate career aspirations are satisfied. And we have to create, the kind of, when we interviewed so many women, right from constables to officers, we found that there was so much of a bias against women. So we really need to create a sensitization awareness so that, women are accepted. Now, in this kind of a scenario, when today I am talking of so much bias, you can very well imagine how Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was such a visionary. He wanted women to have a very important role in the whole army. Unfortunately, all of us know as history students that there was so much of a rivalry between Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose. And therefore, we have really not highlighted the contribution of Subhash Chandra Bose. Now we have started talking about it. And there has really not been much focus on the Rani Jhansi regiment. It has all, the material has been suppressed, and it has really contributed a lot to women at that time. And we find that it is, again, that one more reason why we have devalued the contribution of the Rani Jhansi regiment is that, there has been a lot of leaning towards Gandhian philosophy, of ahimsa and non-violence. And it gave very little attention to, the role played by the revolutionaries. Our writings of Indian history have focused so much on the non-violence that, this is an area where we have totally, ignored it, and we have not highlighted it. But the reality is that, we did get independence, and there was a struggle on both fronts, people who had a very revolutionary ideology, and even people who were following a non-violent method. And we really need to rewrite them back into history and re-establish them, because history is very selective. All of us know each and every government uses history for its own purpose, for its own benefits. And we find that, we have really ignored the role of Rani Jhansi regiment. What is very interesting is, in 1942, you can very well see the kind of biases we have for women in the army, in the police, the Air Force, Navy, even today in the 21st century. But in 1942, in South Asia, we had this women's regiment, which came up with the sole aim of, fighting the British Raj and the colonial Raj. And they took assistance from the Japanese. It was one of the very few all-female combat regiments during the Second World War. And it was led by Captain Lakshmi Swaminathan. It was raised in July 1943, and it had, most of the population came from Southeast Asia. The name of this regiment was given as Rani Jhansi Regiment. And, here are some pictures of these women who played a very major role in this regiment. What happened on July 9, 1943, the Indian Independence League of Singapore, it made Subhash Chandra Bose as their president, and they promised him funds, saying that he wanted to free India, and they said that they would provide him funds for this purpose. At that time, Bose called for a total mobilization. He wanted 3 lakh soldiers. He also wanted, 30 lakh rupees. And he said that he also wanted a unit of brave women. These were the 3 conditions with which he wanted to work. And in 1942, Singapore surrendered itself. It surrendered. There was a surrender of Singapore by the British and the Japanese. And then, there was a lot of interest saying that we need to form an Indian Liberation Army. At that time, there were many Indians who were working in Singapore. Some of the very important ones among them included K.P. Keshav Menon, S.C. Guha, N. Raghavan, and they formed a council of action. This, their Indian National Army, or the Azad Hind Fauj was there. It did not receive any commitment or approval from the occupied Japanese forces, saying that whether they are going to support them in this war or not. The Japanese were more or less quiet at this point. In this kind of a backdrop, we find that Subhash Chandra Bose came to Singapore. He came to Singapore, and first, he wanted to go to Russia, but then it was getting so cold. Then via Afghanistan, he then went to Germany. So he was trying to collect all the kind of support he could to fight the British imperialists. And then, from Germany, he came to Singapore. When he landed in Singapore on July 2nd, 1943, we find that, after this, he went to Tokyo. He had a meeting with the Prime Minister Tojo, the Japanese leader. And then, they promised him, they said that they have no desire to have any territorial expansion in India. So, with this kind of an assurance, Bose came back to Singapore, and he set up this provincial government to free India. This provincial government declared a war against British India. And many of the Axis power recognized this provincial government of Bose as its ally. And at this time, there was, Bose was very keen that women should also become a very active participant in this whole process. And he wanted to form this women's regiment. And in the rally, he held a big rally in a ground, and Dr. Lakshmi, she was also, present in this big congregation which was taking place. And she immediately wanted to join this regiment. And when she heard Bose talking about a women's regiment, she visited many families. See, I'm talking about the year, the period which is 1942-43, and it was not so easy for the women to come out, but she visited a number of families. And many of the families were very reluctant. They had a notion of women's places at home. They had a very traditional view of women, that the women should not come out of the home. And in spite of all these difficulties, Lakshmi was able to gather 20 enthusiastic girls. And we find that, these girls were willing to break the barriers. And when Bose came, these girls presented a guard of honor to him. Subhash Chandra Bose was so impressed that he invited Dr. Lakshmi to lead this wing. And it was on 12th July 1943 that this, it came into a reality. The formation of this women's regiment was there, and it was named as Rani of Jhansi Regiment. The main reason why this regiment was named Rani Jhansi, because, Rani Jhansi is still, she is a symbol of valor during the first, war of independence. She had risen against the Britishers in the 1857, which the Britishers continued to call as a mutiny. And, she was a widow, but she was a very skilled warrior. She defended her town against the British. And at the age of 20, she died in battle. She was not able to survive. So by naming this regiment, on the name of Rani Jhansi, Bose employed a very powerful metaphor of resistance. He said, this was the powerful metaphor of resistance against the colonial rule. And, this really revived the memory of Rani Jhansi's fight against the Britisher. And Bose visualized that, in the final war which we will have for India's independence, there will be thousands of these Ranis who would join and play a major role. And what Subhash Chandra Bose was doing, he stressed that, he gave example. He said honor and heroism is something which is very important. And in a very famous statement which Bose made, he said, it is not important how many guns you carry or how many cartridges you can fire, but it is the spiritual force which will generate by your heroic example that is important. He wanted to set up an example of these women that, they will become leaders for other women. And it was not very important that how many guns they are going to fire or how many cartridges they are going to shoot. And we find that the Rani legend is something, it is in multiple sources of Hindu culture and religious tradition. When we talk of, when he said ma or the mother, this is something which is also found right from our Vedic tradition. And women is always seen as a Durga. He imagined women as Durga or Bhavani or as Chandi. So it is a very different image from what was being shown as, women being Sita. And to him, it was, this was a very legitimate alternative to Gandhiji's non-violence, where, Sita was represented as being a very submissive and ideal woman. In contrast, you had the portrayal of women by Bose, who's a Durga, who's a Bhavani, who's a Chandi, and, she is going to fight the Britishers. And we find that, what Bose did in reality, he's a big visionary and he could really see much more forward. He brought in a very powerful image, a very effective image of women leaders, in front of the whole people. And why is it that the women were drawn? You had slowly, large number of women who started joining him, because definitely one was the personal charisma of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. He was able to draw a large number of these women. And again, to many women, this was a big leap from the Gandhian ideal to women having a very active role in, and this was something which was very exciting for these women. Women who were always, in closed doors, they were in parda, they were not allowed, they didn't have that kind of a freedom. And imagine you have a person here who is giving them this role, that they are going to play an equal role and they are going to fight. This was very exciting for a large number of women. And we find that, Bose proudly declared that no power on earth could hold a nation in subjugation if it consisted of such women. He kept giving examples from these women and saying that, this country can no longer be held in as a slave. And therefore, he had critically conceptualized the whole Rani Jhansi regiment from the whole notion of, ancient Indian women who were supposed to be very powerful. And this unit was inaugurated on October 1943. And we find that, he brought in a lot of imagery from the Vedic period, saying that, women have always been active. This was a time where, women were seen as being intellectual. They participated in rituals. They also, they could have a freedom in selecting whom they want to marry. And we find that he wanted to, he said in this whole, Sanskrit culture, the high position which women had, he wanted to get back that position for women at this time. And he said, in one of his speeches, Subhash Chandra Bose said, when our countrymen on the other side of the frontier, they will see you marching with rifles in hand, they will join you and take the rifles from you and carry on the fight which you begin. So, he said that when you are the ones who are going and marching, you will have thousands of men also coming, taking these flags from you, and they will also continue this fight. So we will get a large force. And he wanted, he imagined the Ranis as vanguard of the INA crossing into Burma borders and all these areas, and, bringing in a large more revolutionary to the freedom struggle. Bose's idea, Bose was very much influenced by both Vivekananda and Ramakrishna. And both of them, whether it is Vivekananda or Ramakrishna, they really emphasize the female aspect of Hinduism. For Vivekananda, he adopted the personal goals of salvation through service of humanity. And from Ramakrishna, he affected that one can attain their own salvation by serving humanity, and we can abandon worldly desires, breaking away from all these strain. Ramakrishna Paramhans, he popularized the whole concept of a supreme mother. He spoke about Kali, and Bose was very much influenced by this. The Hind Forge was initially made the member in charge of the women's section, and you had, most of the women, when they started coming in, the first training was held at Sainan on 19 July 1943. And what they did, first women were trained in military training. They got a military training, but they were also trained in first aid. And, these were both the trainings which were given. Similar training centers were also set up in, at Salator, the naval base, and also in Penang. See, all this is happening outside, in these region. And Captain Lakshmi, she started broadcasting to a number of women's regiments, and she encouraged more and more women to come and join this. And she said that, the whole, the national freedom burns in everyone's heart, irrespective of sex. She said it is not that men who have a monopoly that they will fight for the nation. And she said that, we should draw inspiration from women like Chand Bibi, Lakshmi Bai, and women can also fight for nationalism. Here is Lakshmi Sehgal, who is at a young age and later on in old age. To give you a little background about Lakshmi Sehgal, she was born as Lakshmi Swaminath in Madras, now, Chennai, on 24th October 1914. Her father was a lawyer, S. Swaminathan, and he practiced criminal law in Madras High Court. And her mother, A.V. Ammakutti, was known as, Ammi Swaminathan, and she was a very well-known social worker at that time, and they were involved in a large number of independence activities. And, they had roots in Kerala too. Lakshmi Sehgal chose to study medicine, and she received her MBBS degree from Madras Medical College in 1938. And a year later, she got a diploma in gynecology and obstetrics. And then, she started working as a doctor in the government Kasturba Gandhi Hospital, which was located in Triplicane in Chennai. Then, she got married to a pilot, P.K.N. Rao. Unfortunately, this marriage didn't work out, it was a failure. And then in 1940, she left for Singapore, after her marriage failed. And when she was in Singapore, she met a number of these, people who were part of the Indian National Army. She also, as I mentioned earlier, she went to listen to Bose, and, she tried to, there also, she set up a clinic. She tried to help a lot of these migrant populations which were coming, they were very poor, and all the migrant labor that were being shifted from India, she tried to help them with, medical needs, etc. And when she went, when she heard Bose speaking next morning, she went to meet Bose personally, face to face. And she says, she was so impressed with him. And she found that, many of the views which Netaji had, where it coincided with her own views. And she felt that, Netaji was the first person who said women should play a very central role in this whole armed struggle, and they would be able to defeat the colonial colonial powers. And not only, defeat the colonial powers, they could also end their own subjugation. When she heard these kinds of words, it really resonated with much of what was her philosophy. And she said, she was very impressed with Netaji's word. And when Netaji asked her to, would she like to join the women's wing? And she said that, she's already decided and she's going to really join this. And she says, for us, they had this discussion. And she came to know, that Netaji was very much opposed to the caste system. He was very much in favor of women being empowered. And he believed that, Indian society has to be multiracial, multilingual, and multi-religious. So she found Subhash Chandra Bose very open-minded. And he also spoke at length about the historical Rani Chand Bibi and other valorous heroine who had fought for their own kingdoms. And he also, something which, today we are talking, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose also discussed with Lakshmi Sehgal, and he said we need a much more better sense of history. And, once this regiment is formed, women become very important members in this regiment, maybe, our history would change. And we find that, when Lakshmi writes her autobiography, she also wrote in that, that Subhash Chandra Bose spoke for 3 hours. He continued to speak for 3 hours to her. And then she realized that, what a forward-looking person he is. And, his whole views were so important. She was very much, it was a very charismatic meeting. And what struck her in this meeting was that Bose was very sincere. He came across as a very sincere person, and she felt, she writes in her autobiography that I felt that this man could never take a wrong step, and one could trust him completely and have utmost confidence in him. So this is something which she found. And then, it was, she continued to meet him, and she had long interviews with him. And next day, she was given a room in the headquarters, and she started recruiting women. And initially, she says that, when I told Netaji that I'm not very hopeful of getting women, many women are really not joining, because, the educated and middle class women have so many problems in coming out and joining. And then, and many of them had gone back into India. And at that time, Bose answered her. He said that don't depend on middle class women for this revolution. He says you have to look among the working class women. And if the working class, the kisans, the farm laborers, and they will become your backbone of the revolution. So, this was a big revelation to her, because till now she was only confining herself to the elite and the middle class, and she was not getting any of these women. But after Bose gave her this advice, when she started moving among the working population, among the workers and the kisan, she could really get a large number of women. And Abid Hassan, who was the secretary to Netaji, he was there to assist her. And she really became a very pivotal figure in this whole organization. To start with, there were 15 to 20 women who joined. And slowly we find that, when she was searching for these women to join the regiment, she herself says, we had to be very strict in our selection. We had to pick and choose the very best among them. It's not that, any women who wanted to join, they would take them. She said, no, we had to pick a woman who was the best among them. And finally, with all the efforts, they were able to get a regiment of 1,500 women. And out of these, they were all trained as soldiers. There were about 200 women who were trained as nursing staff. There was so much of enthusiasm and efficiency among these young women. And they were, what was very interesting is, none of these women had, any contact with India. See, they just had a cultural affinity to India for whom they are fighting. And it was a cultural association. And many of them had not even been to India. So this Rani Jhansi regiment, with a lot of teenager volunteers, 170 cadets, and many of them coming from the rubber states of Malaysia. They were given a lot of training in Singapore, and later on they were stationed in Rangoon and Bangkok. And we find that within a year, there were about 300 cadets who were given the rank of non-commissioned officers and sepoys. And they were, depending on their education, we find that, they were given the rank of officers or as sepoys. And they were slowly, from other places in Burma, etc. You had about 500 troops that joined in. And there were 200 women who were given these nursing training. Now, as far as the training was concerned, we find that they were first trained in Singapore and Rangoon. There were 2 camps which were set up. And this was primarily, because Netaji had formed the provincial government of the Azad Hind force. And he wanted to, recruit these women as either non-commissioned officers or commissioned officers. And they were given, the kind of military training they were given. They were also taught how to fight in the jungles, the guerrilla warfare. And this was something which was very unique. In fact, Sehgal writes, she says, the last 3 months of the training were so rigorous, and we had to wear khaki uniform and pants and bush shirts, and even cut our hair short. And she herself writes, she says, I had very long hair and I was very much attached to, at one point I wanted to cut my hair, but my mother never allowed it. And finally, she says, I was so happy that I could cut my hair. Now, having your hair cut, I'm talking about 1943, it was a big step for women, where, a woman was only seen with very long, beautiful hair. But many of these girls, cut their hair. Though again, Subhash Chandra Bose was not very particular. He had a big discussion with them. And he said, okay, those of you who want to cut your hair, you can cut. But those of you who do not want to cut your hair will continue like this. And we find that in this 3 months of training, they were taught to wear pants and breeches. They were given a lot of physical exercises, drill. They had to learn war tactics. They had to, and on the other times, they were also given a lot of lectures on the political scenario around the world. In fact, Subhash Chandra Bose himself took these lectures for these women. And we find that about 50 of these women received a lot of decoration. They did so well in the training that they were decorated by the Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. And this regiment, it really emphasized in a very basic principle in which Subhash Chandra Bose believed, that equality between the sexes, because there was no such distinction which was made. And he imagined that, they would play a very major role in the fight which was happening in Burma, in Imphal. These women would really play a major role. And slowly, a third camp was also set up in Bangkok. And so you had camps in Singapore, Rangoon, and Bangkok where they were being trained. And, like I mentioned, some of them were given training of nurses. And many of them, if you look at the pictures of that time, they wore Jodhpuri breeches and boots. And, at that time also there was a big discussion, because some of the men who had joined Netaji, they said, no, we cannot force these women to wear pants and all. Let them wear saris. And this was something, when I was reading this, I was reminded when I did my work with the police, there was a big discussion among the police women also, whether they would like to wear pants or they would continue with the saris. The sari is a very uncomfortable dress for running, for, other things. And at that time also there was, imagine in 1943, there is a big discussion as to what should be the dress of these women. And at that time, Subhash Chandra Bose was very clear. He said, no, these women need to dress up like men. And Lakshmi Sehgal also agreed. And only as far as, he wanted them to have short hair, but he gave them that freedom that if they don't want to cut their hair, that is fine. For many of these women recruits, discipline and efficiency was something which was very important. And we find, many of these girls felt very proud. They kept their weapons in good order. They were taught how to handle a rifle, a hand grenade, and there were no automatic weapons at that time. They were also given a lot of physical training. They were taught about military tactics, how to read maps, how to go for many of these girls did not know Hindi because they came from different languages, but they had Hindi teaching every day. And within a month, many of them were able to speak in Hindi. And within 3 months, they learned how to speak in Hindi. And many of the political classes, Sehgal talks at length about the political classes which were being held, and Netaji himself was teaching them. Once, this training was over, after 3 months, you had the first batch of the Rani regiment, which was ready. And they were given orders that they have to march to Burma in May 1944. And it was visualized that in small batches, they will start moving towards Burma. And finally, the ultimate goal was that they would go to Imphal. They would fight in Imphal, and then, from there, they would follow the guerrilla tactics. And it was, that many of these women, it was really very interesting that there was no untoward incident. There were so many men in the army, but there was no untoward incident. And many of these women said that, these men would also protect us. They protected us a lot. They felt very much concerned about these women, and especially in the hands, when the Japanese soldiers were there, when the local population was there. Now, what happened? In fact, many of these women write that the biggest male chauvinists were the Japanese, because the Japanese were not willing to give land to these women regiment. They did not want them near them. But then when they saw how efficient these women were, how well trained they were, the Japanese also had to concede, and they changed their mind. And once, they started, unfortunately, history also played its part, and these women really never got a chance to fight. Sometimes, if you keep looking back at history and you wish things were in a different way, if these women had participated, the war would have carried on. Maybe the position of women would have been totally different until today, when we are fighting for a right to enter the military, enter the navy, enter the police as equal members. It would have been sorted out long time back. But unfortunately, what happened, the moment these regiments started marching towards Burma, we find that the Japanese army was repulsed very heavily. They lost, and the British garrison won, and there were heavy casualties to the Japanese side. Now, as far as Bose was concerned, Imphal was out of question now. There was no question for these women to move, because he had visualized that these women would move to Imphal, and then finally from there to Delhi to continue the fight. And it was, this was a time where, on one hand, they suffered heavy losses. The Japanese suffered heavy losses, and the monsoon had also set in. And with the monsoons, the movement in the jungles became very difficult. So though Netaji did not want to withdraw the order, but there was no other option, and he had to give an order where, he asked these the Rani Lakshmi regiment that they should retreat from their position. And finally, they could not really participate. Another, I'll just talk about a few other women who were part of this regiment. The Rani Jhansi regiment was again handed over to Janki Devar. after Lakshmi Sehgal, and she was a 17-year-old girl, and she also came from a very well-to-do family. And she had, when she heard, she was also present when Subhash Chandra Bose was there, and she took out her golden earrings and she donated it to the war chest. Her parents were very upset that, she had done this. But then, she persuaded her parents, saying, please invite Subhash Chandra Bose to our house. Please invite Subhash Chandra Bose, because he was her parents were also very influential. And when Subhash Chandra Bose came, to their house, and he started, her parents were a little skeptical, saying, whether she can join or not. They were not very clear. But at that time, she had already filled up the form that was required. She got her parents' signature and she handed it over to Subhash Chandra Bose in front of her parents, saying that I've already decided and I'm going to join this regiment. This is Janki, they were in this. So, finally, like I said, it was a really fate of history, or the bad luck of this women's group, that, Rangoon fell down, and the Azad Hind government of Subhash Chandra Bose could not really move to Burma, which they had originally planned. And they had to retreat back. And a number of them, there were a lot of casualties. Women also suffered a lot, and many of them died, and finally the unit was disbanded. See, many of these Ranis were so excited. They wanted to see action at the front, but unfortunately many of them could not go there. And we find that, in June 1945, many of them returned back to Singapore. Rani Lakshmi's, Captain Sehgal stayed back in Burma so that she could carry out some of the work. And there were a number of frontline hospitals which were set up. And we find that, they tried to help in these hospitals. They were trying to treat the casualties, women who were dying, because a number of soldiers had come with dysentery, typhus, and severe fever. And they treated these soldiers over here. And it was really sad that finally, there's a lot of noise. Hello? Yeah. Then the Rani Jhansi, when it was disbanded, we find that, Netaji himself was escorted. He escorted the Malayan contingent to Thailand and then to Malaysia. A number of these women again sent a petition to Subhash Chandra Bose, and it was written with their blood. And they said that, they are willing to die. They don't want to be, he should not disband this unit. He should not call for a retreat, and they are willing to go and fight, though there has been so much losses. But unfortunately, at this time, many of the male soldiers also of the INA were severely wounded, and they could not really continue with this fight, in the jungles where they were stationed. There were so many men in the hospital. They were also suffering because of all these monsoon diseases. And we find that, many of the spies of the Allied forces, they were everywhere. And it was, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose had no other alternative but to disband this unit. And there was a heavy bombardment which followed. Again, there were a lot of casualties. Many people died. And we find that, later on, when many of these women got together, they staged a drama for Bose on Rani of Jhansi. And we find that, many of them disbanded. They went to different places and settled down. After the war, all of us know that Lakshmi Sehgal, she became a very active member of the Communist Party. And she also, in the Rajya Sabha, she played a major role. When the Bangladesh crisis was happening, she organized a lot of relief work. And she helped refugees. When the Bhopal tragedy happened, she took an active part in that. And she also was a very active member of ADIVA. And, she continued to see patients till she was in her clinic in Kanpur till the age of 92. She continued her medical practice also. In fact, in 2002, many of these parties, they got together, the Communist Party and of the Revolutionary Socialist Party, All India Forward Bloc. and they nominated Sehgal as a presidential candidate. But unfortunately, she was pitted against Abul Kalam Azad, and there was no competition, and so she could not win. And she died, she was given Padma Bhushan in 1998, and she died on 23rd July 2012. But what is important, she even donated her body to the Kanpur Medical College, and they have promised that there'll be an airport in her name. After the war, Janki, again, she led a very important public life, and she married the attorney Athi Nahapan. And, he was a journalist working with the INA at that time. And we find that, she continued to be a very active member of the Malaysian Congress. And she founded the Malaysian National Congress and was its president. And it was, she was also awarded the Padma Shri in 2000 in recognition of her work and her activities. What is very important is that, most of these girls who were in this army, they learn guerrilla tactics, they learn how to fight. But, there was so much of enthusiasm for them to join. When initially there was a lot of hesitancy, but once these women joined, they were very much, committed to freeing their motherland. If you evaluate the contribution of these women, we find that, you may say that after all, what did they achieve? It was a failure. They could not really go out and see action. The unit was easily disbanded. But what was very important was it really prepped up the psyche of these women. I'm talking about the period 1943. And, women from Hindu, Muslim, Sikh community, money class, working class, they were all together in this and fighting for India's freedom. And, irrespective of religion, caste, etc. If you read, some of the voices of these women, we will get an idea about what it did to these women. P. Papati, who was in the League of Women's section, she says, the young women of India are up for action and are willing to sacrifice and redeem for their motherland from the, Anglo-American imperialism. And she goes on to talk, again, Pratima Pal, who says, I am an ordinary soldier of Rani Jhansi Regiment, not a doll soldier, not a soldier in mere words, but a real soldier in the true sense of the term, in military boots and uniform, armed with wooden weapons to kill the enemy of India. So these are some of the voices of these women. And she continued to be important. If you listen to the voice of Rasma Bhupana, she's another veteran who talks about, and she continued to play a very major role in Malaya throughout this period. And it was only in 1982 that she retired. She went on to establish many, young women Christian association. And then, she moved into USA, where she continued a lot of her social activities. Again, another woman, Manvati Arya, she was also a very active veteran at that time. She continues, she's still a writer. She continues to write poetry, fiction, and autobiography. And she's written a book on Netaji. She, remembers the time when they were there and they had a lot of, they were trying to fight for the motherland. There is also, women like Aruna Chatterjee and Lobnia Chatterjee, who continue to be very important. And, she says, Lobna Chatterjee says, we are very sorry that our Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose is not remembered at all. We cannot forget. I will never stop mourning. So they recognize the contribution of Netaji. You had other women like Pratima Pal, Ramben Mehta, Gauri Bhattacharya, and, they were very active women. So to conclude, I would like to say that though, in terms of real if you assess it and if in terms of achievement, they may not have been very successful. They may not have, fought a real war, But what is very important is that all of them got a lot of inspiration from Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. They were, they became veterans in this fighting, and it was, they really came out of the kitchen. You had these women who no longer wanted to hide in the kitchen. They did not have a traditional role for themselves, and the whole concept of Sita Savitri was something which they kind of left behind. And Geraldine Forbes, when she's writing about women in modern India, she says we have to evaluate all these women not in terms of military terms, but in psychological terms. See what it did to the psychology of these women. They became very popular in the whole country. They were seen as big role models, and it had not only on the other people, it also had an impact on these women who were part of this. Many of them, like I have explained, had exceptional career long after the war was over. They continued to serve the nation in different way. So, it is really a tragedy of history that these women could not really show their achievements in the field. Had they done that, maybe we would have a different history of women today, and we would have women maybe in equal terms, or how Netaji Subhash Chandra imagined. Thank you very much.
Thank you, madam. Thank you, Professor Rekha Pandey. Indeed, a very fantastic presentation, a real tribute to Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. Such a detailed, thoroughly researched work that you have presented. We are very grateful to you, madam, for such a wonderful presentation, giving such historic events which you have presented alongside certain photographs, which are very rare photographs, not to be found in general or regular libraries. So we have put in all your efforts in zeroing on this presentation. And indeed, it's a great pleasure to have you, and it's a wonderful tribute to Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose on his 125th birth anniversary, in commemoration of which Center for Adivasi Research and Development Odisha, in association with the National University of Juridical Sciences Kolkata and Ravenshaw University Cuttack, happened to organize this event. Indeed, we are very grateful to you that you have given such a wonderful presentation on not only Rani Jhansi Lakshmi Bai, who has been a great inspiration, not only for women folks, but for every one of us. The kind of gutsy attitude that she presented, the kind of courage that she happened to enthrall, and you have said it rightly. From they don't want to get confined to kitchen. They want to get themselves out, and they want to be really part of the mainstream. And indeed, you are one of those representatives, right? And not only as the researcher in history, but as well you are representing the women folk also. So the kind of presentation that you have made today, it is in fact an impression on all the women folks that women indeed can inspire people and in different terms, in different walks of life. So very great tribute not only to Netaji, but as well all those freedom fighters, especially those freedom fighters who are actually women folks, including Rani Jhansi Bai. So with this nice presentation, we will thank you from the bottom of our heart on behalf of the Center for Adivasi Research and Development, and also National University of Juridical Sciences Kolkata and Ravenshaw University Cuttack. So with these words, I would hand over the rest of the stuff to Rudra Narayan Das. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Srinivasulu. Now, I would like to invite the Director of Center for Adivasi Research and Development, Dr. Jena, to take a conversation with Professor Pandey.
Thank you so much, Rudra Ranji. Thank you so much, Professor Srinivasulu NS, the moderator of the session, the chief guest of the session, Professor Chakravarti, Honorable Vice Chancellor of National University of Judicial Sciences. With prior permission to the chair, I would like to ask few questions to Professor Rekha Pandey ji.
Yeah,
Please go ahead. Please go ahead, Dr. Jana.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. It's great pleasure to listening you, madam. Such a wonderful lecture given by you. It rightly mentioned by Professor Srinivasulu sir. It's very charming and very delighted when somebody from Professor Rekha Pandey, who spoke about Jhansi and the combination of Netaji. It's really wonderful. Madam, I have a few, not exactly questions, but you can say it is submission. During national movement, if you look back and revisiting the national movement, what happened with this particular women category? If I'm not wrong, you are one of the fantastic voices of these modern days, and you are representing so many women participatory, particular voice. What about the contest between the women participatory? Those are left their life in dangerous kind of anti-national struggle. If I'm not wrong, even I put one name, which is one of the most favorite, all-time favorite of mine, Savitribai Phule.
Mhm.
Even not a single line quoted in the textbook we are read in school and in colleges. What wrong with our history, madam? And if I'm not wrong, what historicism, what historiability, what history territoriality, and what history lies? All these jargons always we put on us to ask nothing and to think nothing. What is your suggestions, madam?
No, definitely. You have a very valid point. And not only, if you look at the social reform movement, Pandita Ramabai and all them,
Yes,
see, they were, what happened initially, women were not in public arena. They were not educated. So the first level of reformers came from the men, people like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Darayanand Saraswati, Ishwar Chand Vidyasagar and all. But the second time, when you had the second level, when women came up, initially they were also towing the same line, which what men were saying, that women should be good housewives, they should take care of the home and all. Because what happened, like Lata Mani and all have written so much about the social reform movement that we have the women's question, only those questions were taken which the Indians found very uncomfortable, which the Britishers were questioning us. So we had a very big paradox which came up. On one hand, you wanted a modern woman, which you could answer to the Britishers. And yet we also wanted a traditional women, who would continue to look after the home and all. So in this, there was a big paradox of the social reform movement, which continued for a long time, even during the freedom struggle, which you have. So one, you have this kind of a women, who is modern as well as traditional. So within that, what were the roles? And then, this whole struggle between women as non-violent, as Satyagraha, as Sita, the kind of ideology which Gandhi and all were saying, all these women get really lost. See, earlier again, women like Savitribai Phule and all, we are really not talking. We hardly talk about the contribution of women, except a few women at the top. So if this is an area, if you really look, you will find so many women, because throughout history, women have always found spaces. They have negotiated, they have fought, they have shown their agencies. So, history is not just one narration of change. You had a large number of these women who have contributed in different way, in spite of all the issues, problems, patriarchy. But we have really not highlighted these women, because by and large, history is only about men, talking about men's achievement, and they have really been lost. So what you say is really correct.
Thank you so much, madam. Madam, I am also the son of this soil where Subhash Bose born and brought up.
Okay.
And I am from this institution where Subhash Bose is also one of alma mater of mine.
Okay.
So on behalf of Subhash Bose and the proud Ravenshaw Abhiyan, all of Ravenshaw University students, I would like to ask the last question to you before I know you running up short of time, because already you spoke more than 1 and 70 minutes perhaps. Yeah, so this is the last question from my side. Madam, what wrong with particular the Jhansi Bai when we read in textbook orientation in school days and post Manikarnika, the National Award Kangana Ranawat's storytelling of mind-blowing kind of things. What cinema tells us? You are from Women Studies and you are heading the center. So what wrong with our historians in modern days context? If you look back the Chipko movement, what happened there? That was the first women movement ever we had seen and we have registered in the page of post-colonial history. not even a single page. Even today, many schools and many colleges not worried about these women's participatory, in particular movements as concerned. When we are looking movements, we have most seen about media movement and politics. In these days, you know what media is doing. Media is only selling the agencies of big corporate houses. And what your ideas in terms of Manikarnika and what you researched, you exactly highlighted through your 66 numbers of slides. You are representing Rani Jhansi Bai from your any part of corner of your presentation. How you stimulation and how you amalgamation of your ideas on Kangana Ranawat's Manikarnika. Please, madam.
No. See, the problem is, I think I would, rather than just talking about Manikarnika, what happens if you look at history, whatever women have contributed and all, in the, it has been kind of subsumed under the larger narration. That is the biggest problem. See, what happened, even if you get the freedom struggle, many of the women said that, we are fighting two enemies. One, we are fighting the British, no doubt, but we are also fighting patriarchy. We are also fighting the men in our own families and all. But at that time, they said, no, let us fight the Britishers, because they didn't want to divide these energies. They said, if all of us get together, we fight against the Britishers. And then once we are the masters of our own destiny, all our problems will be solved. There was a big euphoria during the freedom struggle, which happened. And unfortunately, you had the the report on the status of women, which came up in 1974-75. It really showed that after so many years also, there was not much change in the status of women. So, all that euphoria saying when we become masters of our own destiny, things will be sorted out. It didn't happen. And it showed that, politically, socially, economically, there is so much of a gender gap. Today also, if you look at the report of gender gap, there is so much of a gender gap. And unfortunately, like what you are saying, in the media and all, these are again in control of big houses, corporate houses. So you only have that kind of an image. We either, women becomes redundant than looking good. See, in that film also, there is so much of an emphasis on how she looks, how she dresses, etc. Because they also have to sell. That is the highlight which is there. We do not see women as achievers, as leaders. That is something which is not highlighted. So, there are so many issues which are there, how we represent women, and it leads to, these kinds of biases which really do not go.
Thank you, madam. Thank you so much. It's indeed pleasure interacting with you. Thank you so much, madam. Without wasting of your time, with prior permission of our moderator, sir, I would like to invite Dr. Shravan Bag to go for a formal vote of thanks. Thank you so much, madam. Namaste, madam.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Jena. Well, it's really a very tough task to give a vote of thanks at this juncture, because what madam has said, the kind of enlightenment she has given after simply saying a thank would be really injustice. But anyway, let me to take this floor to give a sort of formal vote of thanks from the core of my heart.
Dr. Bag, if you want to interact with madam, go with this. Don't worry, please.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Jena. Well, interaction, just a sort of reflection, because the way ma'am has delivered this talk, she has left no stone unturned. The only thing what I would say is that, yes, we cannot think of a developed society. In fact, the existence of a society cannot be thought of without thinking of women. In fact, our shloka has also said this same thing. Like, if you look at the Indian sloka of Manusmriti, then it is clearly said that Yatra Narjastu Pujyanti Ramante Tatra Devata. Manusmriti, it says, where the women are given worship, that there the whole God, the Almighty lives. So it itself says that no society can think its existence, its development, negating the role of women. And when we talk about the society at present, I'm absolutely echo with all of you and what ma'am has said, that although we have not somewhere not devoted or not worship, but somewhere we have not given justice to this section of people, particularly to women. And you have rightly said that history also somewhere we find is remaining silent, either by known or by unknown, the way we should have given the respect and homage to women, particularly the real heroes behind the screen. Somewhere we have negated that, and the only submission would be, yes, now we are at this juncture thinking about the new education policy. We are also at the verge of coming up with a new curriculum. So I would say that let us join hands together. Professor Pandey can also take a lead on this, and let us advocate at some point of time where the curriculum finds a place, a new shape, looking at the justice for which we are talking about, the real worship, the real place for which we are advocating. That would be my submission. Probably ma'am can reflect on that. That would be my take from this talk. Ma'am, would you like to?
Definitely. Yes, very much.
Yes. So thank you so much, ma'am. Well,
Small
that much from my side. Now coming back to the vote of thanks, I must say, as I said, that simply
before
saying.
you finally render vote of thanks, a small interruption.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Please, sir. Please, sir. Please, sir. Please, sir.
Rani Jhansi Lakshmi Boy, Rani Manikarnika, Rani Padmavati from Chittorgarh, Rajasthan, Madam Pule from Maharashtra, Rani Rudramadevi from Andhra and Telangana.
Kittur
as
Chennamma.
Yeah, Chittur Chennamma, as Madam pointed out. So, and even in the freedom struggle also, Lady Gandhi, that is Kasturba, right, and Sarojini Naidu. There are a number of lady fighters indeed have contributed immensely. That's why we worship women as Adi Shakti, Adi Parashakti, Mother India. We don't call Father India, we call Mother India. So the entire universe is actually indebted to women. The entire universe is indebted to women. And as rightly pointed out by Dr. Jana, our history has to be rewritten, not just highlighting the masculine sex, but also highlight, I don't call fairer sex, equal sex. We should not call women as fairer sex, because that's again a discrimination, right? You have to give that equal status to women. And on the eve of commemoration of Netaji's 125th birth anniversary, it's also a great tribute to all women leaders, as pointed out by Madam Rani Kittur, Rani Chennamma, Rani Jhansi Lakshmi Bai, of course, Rani Manikarnika, as my friend Dr. Jana mentioned, represented, probably portrayed by Kangana Ranaut, as well Rani Padmavati, portrayed by Deepika Padukone. This kind of sacrifice that Rani Padmavati made, Rani Rudramadevi made, right? That has to be represented, not only represented, but represented formally, firmly in the history books of us. And as pointed out by my friend, the new education policy, whatever we are contemplating, it's a wonderful opportunity for all of us to rethink and go for renaissance of Indian history in terms of the kind of contribution that women have made, not only to the freedom struggle, but as well to the life that we are actually living in. That's why I said Mother India, or Adi Parashakti, who is responsible for entire universe. So our vote of thanks is not just to Madam Pandey, but Madam Pandey is today representing all these Ranis and freedom fighters, ranging from Jhansi Lakshmi Bai, Manikarnika, Padmavati, Savitri Bai Phule, Kittur Rani Chennamma, Rudramadevi, and all those women freedom fighters, women leaders, women folks, and all those people whom we call as Adi Parashakti, Ma Parvati, and it's none other than our Mother Earth. And indeed, a great pleasure, Madam, in having you today for this program. It's a great tribute to Netaji, and as well, indeed, a vote of thanks through you. By rendering vote of thanks to you, we are actually rendering vote of thanks to all those women leaders, women fighters who have made this day possible for all of us, Madam. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello, Dr. Jana.
Yes, please.
Yes. Well, I mean, I absolutely echo with Professor Srinivasalu. He has rightly pointed out, and in fact, he has initiated this process of proposing vote of thanks. Let me to take it to the end of the discussion for the day. So once again, it was really indeed a great pleasure to have you, ma'am, on this Netaji Memorial International Lecture Series, jointly organized by Ravenshaw University, then Center for Adivasi Research and Development, then National University of Judicial Sciences, Kolkata. This is probably the first of its initiative that we are taking on digital platform to commemorate the birth anniversary of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, who is the real hero to be a real hero, not for Indian context, but for all those people who love their land, who love their motherland. And as you have rightly said that he has a lot of inspiration, in fact profound inspiration, and he had a firm belief that as long as the women are empowered, the women are worshipped, this task could easily be solved, this task could easily be achieved. And as you have rightly said that it is right time, in fact it's an opportunity. Let us take it as an opportunity. Let us start from zero. Let us be optimist. Let us be hopeful that the new education policy will address all these recommendations and changes that we are talking about, and we will see a new day, a new India, a new society where women are worshipped, where women are not struggling for their justice, for their right. And taking this ahead, ma'am, we are once again thankful for your valuable insight, your precious time, and the lovely slides where you have once again portrayed, and it was like you was giving a real picture of the entire happenings that has happened over the years, and for which today we are here. So thank you so much, ma'am, for making it very lively. We are looking forward for your presence and guidance in the days to come, and we will continue to seek your support in this journey, ma'am. With this note, let me once again thank all the participants, our mentors, our advisors, and our partnering institution for taking this agenda from local to global level, and joining hands together for such a wonderful event. Thank you so much once again. We will be looking forward for yet another talk continuing this lecture series. So that's it from my side. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much, madam. Good night, madam.
Good night. Bye-bye. Thanks a lot. Nice pleasure. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night, ma'am.